Hi and welcome to a new video. Today we're going to look at the overview of how we later on want to describe our second brain. So in this video we're going to cover how do we want to design it, what are the individual pages for, and overall just a gathering of ideas. And then later on we can go back and look at what we started with and compare it to what we actually created. So this video is just the follow-up from last week to add some more informations to the specific areas of this template. So first of all, we start with the home. The home of the second brain is more like the dashboard of everything we have in there. At least that's my idea of how I understand it. And therefore, in the first aspect, here on the left, we can add some little gadgets like a quote that we have stored in the library, or we can display our to-do list. Maybe we can even make it that after our to-do list is completed, we get a quote, so kind of like a rewarding system. Next up is the overall use of this second brain, and it is more to help our mind organize everything that comes in, and we don't necessarily have the capability to sort through in a moment, or we can always remember everything, and therefore this is kind of like an imprint of how we can store everything we gather, all the projects we're working on, and all tasks at hand that we can just simply put in there and forget about, but not in the way that we can later not access it anymore. Therefore, we put it in the second brain. And the reason for this template is that all the data that we store in there is not unsorted. We have the capability of sorting it into different areas, projects that we will cover later, and then have a connection between them, and therefore always have a reminder, or have the possibility to have a reminder of why we're actually doing this, and not having to always remember what we are doing this for. A further expansion option that I already wrote down is that we could add a analytics page that is more of the bottom part that I've always put in there, that you could access some analytics on how much traffic was on that page. So how much did we send there, how many tasks did we complete, how many projects did we work on, what was our most worked on project, or the area that was most important for us. And this is something that we could put in a different page, or we can just simply leave it out, as I think will make the most sense for the beginning, especially since we don't want to have the second brain to be an overload of our first brain. That would be total nonsense. And therefore, it is important to keep it simple and clean, and just something that we can use but don't necessarily have to. So what is the dashboard? The dashboard is more supposed to showcase some status updates. This includes our to-do list, what we are currently working on, and some summary of important aspects like our current financial goals or situation, if we want to have that displayed, or we even put the data in to have it displayed. Therefore, there's going to be a card view, which I will present in one of the next videos, when we actually get to creating this in Notion, where you can always skip immediately to this area, or just look at the overview. So after the dashboard, there comes the inbox. The inbox is basically the place where everything gets stored from the beginning. If we have a new idea, we can always just go in, make a quick add, and it lands in the inbox. The inbox is supposed to be a temporary storage, so we are not supposed to store our data there. Therefore, it's the library or the task section. It's more that we can gather random thoughts and put them in there, and later on, when we go through the inbox, we can fill out all the necessary information to put it in the respective areas, like the tasks or the habits or projects, depending on where it's supposed to go. Since the inbox is supposed to store the data temporarily, will have a bin of the inbox. That is where everything that has been longer than, for example, a week in the inbox gets stored. The reason for that is we don't want our inbox to overgrow, and we also don't want everything that leaves the inbox doesn't directly go to the archive, so we don't have to search for it. We still want to have it in the inbox, but for a longer duration of time. So now in the bin, for example, we're going to keep the data for a month. So in a total about 35 days, around 5 weeks, that we keep everything in the inbox section. This is so that when we can't go through our inbox within a week, for example, we can still have a bit more time for when we go through our inbox to sort through it and not have to go back into the archive. Basically, it just is the storage in between inbox and archive for if it is still important. But if it's not important, we can just leave it in the bin and it will be automatically transferred into the archive. The task view is everything that is coming up. So events, tasks, and maybe even reminders like birthdays. You can make them repeat regularly, or you say they have a due date, and then they are gone. No matter whether we did them or we did not do them. And there is important that tasks always have either a due date or no due date. I mean, there aren't many other options, but it is important that we split these two apart, because when we need to do something and we're like, well, in theory I have to clean the house, but cleaning the house is not necessarily something we have to do this week. And instead we have a presentation next week, so we have to prepare this presentation this week. So it is more important that we see the task with a due date, and therefore they will be split into different areas where we can look at them. The tasks are supposed to be a guideline for bigger projects. That's why we're going to cover projects and areas later, and they kind of help us to grow into a specific aspect, or just simply help us with daily tasks that we don't want to always remember, and everything that is not always on our mind. It's also important that it's put in here, because I personally don't want to use multiple apps. I prefer to have everything in one app and just go through there, instead of having to go through the Notes app and the calendar or a specific habit tracker, and then we have some paper where we store our thoughts, and then when we're not home we can't access these thoughts. So it is, for me personally, important that everything can be in one place, but it of course doesn't have to be, since for me personally pen and paper is still great to just write down some quick notes. And later on we can add this task view, as I've said, on the homepage, or we can create a calendar where all of our tasks are displayed, so that we have a general overview instead of just a task in order. The habits is just simply everything that comes up every day, every week, every month, but is not a task that we created especially. It's something that's always occurring. Because an example is cooking. You know, you always pre-cook, and then you say every Sunday I cook. So you add the habit of cooking every Sunday. The habits, I personally just use them to add something new, or to make sure that I always keep a baseline of this and don't lose track of it over time. For me, in this year I started with trying to do sports every single day, and then skipping a day, and then I felt bad, and then you can look back at it and see, well, I did it every other day except yesterday. And then you go back to it, and it's more like, here you can see you didn't just fail this week, you did it before, and you can see how it increases. If you are like, well, I want to do sports more, then you check it every day you do sports, and you can see, well, first week I did nothing, second week once, in the second month I actually started doing 3 times. It's just to help us keep this memory alive. Therefore, we can display it as a table where where we can just simply see, well, this habit was checked on every day or not. Or something that I currently more use is a calendar where we can see every day more graphically. It's also something nice that is a graph. I personally use this to just show how much of the percentage wise of the tasks I have completed over the time, and therefore can just look at it more visually and be like, oh yeah, you can see the curve and how maybe you can even see some patterns in there. It's, for me personally, easier to see with a graph than with a table, and therefore I think it's quite helpful. After the habits, we go to the projects. The projects consist of multiple goals or tasks that we want to complete, and they are to help us improve ourselves. For me, a project, for example, would be to upload every single week of the year. I can go ahead and check off every week that I uploaded a video and see this task fill and see that I'm keeping this project. And it's not, I didn't do it for a week and then I forgot that I've had the project, and then you can go back and you are like, well, I had that project, but then it failed. And if you have it written down, it's more visual. You see it more often, you're more often reminded, and therefore you might work through it better. And it is very important to say that projects are not just tasks that you want to complete. Projects are a combination of tasks that you want to complete over a longer time span. For example, a project of mine is also traveling in the summer into the mountains. And since you can't just simply travel into the mountains, you need to plan your vacation, you need to organize everything, you need to pay for it. So there are multiple aspects that come together to solve this project of mine to get there. And therefore, it's a combination of many different aspects. Also, something important is that if I write down something about a book I read, and the current book I'm reading about is Extending Our Lifespan, Extending Our Lifespan doesn't help me with planning my vacation. So the note shouldn't show up in any relation to planning my vacation, and therefore we are going to connect these projects with our notes section to be able to have specific notes displayed in specific projects or areas that we feel like they are connected to. And for the layout of the page, we are going to use a status system. The status system consists of the top part, currently in progress or started, and below that we have projects that are currently on hold because we are sick, for example, and can't work on it, or if I want to go run a marathon and I broke my leg, then I currently can't work on that, so I will put it on hold so that it doesn't clutter my in-process. And below that we have the not started yet, to just show all of our projects that we have planned so that we don't forget about them. We can already add tasks, we can already add goals, but we don't have to necessarily start them yet. On the fourth part that is for me personally important is the discarded section. In the discarded section we can just simply say a project was relevant to us, but it is not anymore. So we don't want to delete it immediately because we could use it later on, or just simply to have a history of for how many projects did we start, or what did we try out, because things don't always work out. They might end up turning out to not be the right thing for us, and therefore this abandoned, discarded section is important. And there I would also add a filter. So if the project has been in the discarded section for, let's say, a month, it goes into the archive so that it is still not deleted. We could technically still reach it, but it is away from our view. We don't see it, we aren't confronted with it anymore, because it is still important that we always declutter our system so that we don't get overwhelmed just looking at it. And especially with discarded projects, many people have it that they see, well, I didn't do this and I didn't do this and I abandoned this project. And they are like, well, just this negative part. But they totally forget to see what they are currently working on, and it can be overwhelming to have all this negative part. So we want to have the negative things away from us. And therefore we are also going to add a section on the lower part that is supposed to hold things longer, maybe even forever, depending on how many projects you build, that has a completed status. And these completed are supposed to be there to show us, well, I did not just have many projects, but I've already also completed them. I have first completed one, then we will check 3 months later if what did we actually achieve in this past 3 months, and we can see, well, I completed 3 projects. And that shows us, well, we didn't only abandon projects, but we also completed them, and they are more like a history. So we are not going to put them in the archive that fast, if we put them at all in there. And these projects, is important to say that they are connected to areas. So we're going to cover areas next. And areas are more like the pillars of your life. Your health, your financial situation, your creative thoughts, what you want to learn. And they are supposed to summarize all the tasks, projects, notes in one place. So these areas are more, if I click on the financial system, on the financial area, and see all tasks, all projects related to this. So we can sort all of these, everything that's coming up in there, and have a more visual split between everything that is in our system. It is important to say that these areas are not supposed to be completed, because you can complete finance. I've also put some examples in there. For example, the finance save an X amount of money, or learning Spanish, for example. And I have for this year reached section 3 is currently the thing that I'm working on, since I'm in section 2. And it's not my end goal to reach section 3, but it is a goal. It is a project in this process of learning Spanish. You could also say I will create the indie area learning, create the project Spanish, and then say, yeah, one goal is to reach section 3, 4, 5, 6. Totally fine. But in my opinion, if you say a project learning Spanish, you will take quite a long time until you complete this project. And since projects and tasks are supposed to be completed, you should add something that shows you that you made progress on it, or you should be able to finish something. It's not about having it sit there and always being like, well, I'm working on this for 2 years now and I still haven't completed it. I mean, yeah, there will be projects that will take multiple years, but it shouldn't be every project. So in that case, I might add the area Spanish. If I say, well, Spanish gets so important for me, I want to finish Spanish entirely in Duolingo and many other apps, then I could add it as a new area for my life. But currently it's not that big that I would call it an area of my life. It's more like a project in learning. Another thing is sport, running a marathon, climbing a 4,000 meters high mountain. And the creative part are just some examples of mine. In the overview of these areas, we will have the navigation to the individual areas of our life so that we can easily navigate between them. But we are also going to add the project that we most recently worked on so that we can easily access them immediately without having to go through the area itself, and to have something shown that shows that the area does not only exist, but we also have a part of it that we have already worked on. The area also doesn't need to consist out of projects. We can also just have a task, because not everything can be split up into a project. Maybe sometimes it is just, yeah, I want to get something. that's my task, that's my goal, and not, well, to reach this goal, I will have to save $10. This isn't worth it to create as a project with individual steps. If you really save a low amount of money, sure, it still is. But if you say, well, it's something, I have $10 right now, and I would just have to go to the store, it's a task, not a project, in my opinion. And therefore, areas aren't restricted to projects, can also have tasks and just notes and something that we want to do, not just bigger things to work on. And also important is that these areas are never static. They can always change. We describe them. If I create now an area about sport, I say, yeah, I want to look in a mirror and say, I like how I look. That is something that I have for sport. So that will be my description of it. If I say, well, sport, my importance is that I have about 10% of body fat, that can also be a description. And therefore, you can choose it, but it's nothing that for me would describe this area perfectly. For example, learning is also, I want personally to advance. I don't have a specific section I want to advance in, but I want to advance it all and to have this visibly represented. And therefore, the corresponding description should also match the area, but you don't necessarily have to have a description. For me, it just seems really good to have a description, to have this reminder of why are we actually doing this and what is actually the thing that makes this part, these kind of actions, a pillar of my life. And therefore, I think these descriptions can be quite important. Next up, since we've already mentioned it a couple of times, is the library. I've put far more into the library since it was the first thing I actually thought about. And the library still has these quick add buttons. For example, it can also be split into quotes, recipes, books, shows, and a bin. The bin is here also, again, rather important. The library is the space where we store every note, every recipe, everything that comes to our mind, everything that we want to try out. That's not a task, but something we have written down. If we want to try a recipe, we will add a quick new note that is in the topic, has the description of a recipe, all the ingredients, what's the process of making it, and then we can add a status. Have we tried it, or we haven't tried it, and would we recommend it, or not again, and therefore we can sort through all the recipes. Quotes is everything that we just simply hear and think like, well, it maybe doesn't hurt to read this again the next time I look at my phone. So therefore we can use the quote storage to reference it later on the homepage, for example. Books is just simply a reading list, basically, for all the books that we want to read, or all the books that we have read. Therefore, a quick description, what is the book about, and maybe a review, or the status, not read, currently reading, or finished reading. And in the finished reading, we kind of like have the option to say, we would like to recommend this, or it was not that good that we would recommend this. This is not necessary if you're someone who just reads a book once. But I personally read them multiple times, most of the time. And some books are better to read again and others not. For me personally, most of the time I just look at one and see, well, I would have recommended that to read it again. And some I just don't want to read again. But I currently have over 200 books, so it gets a lot of stuff that I have to remember. Yeah, this book is worth it, this book is not worth it, or this book was about this and this about this, and therefore the storage would help. to still declutter our own mind. And therefore the library is also a place where it's not about visual representation. It's more of just a list of all the notes that we have, all the quotes, all the recipes, all the books. And the main dashboard just simply can show the 4 most rows most recently added to the section, or most important if we want to add a importance, and is going to showcase basically something like a spoiler into it, and have more like a drop-down list to have it quick and easy to read through all of them if we want to. And as I mentioned, there will also be a bin here, because if we delete a note or say not important anymore, switch to the status bin, it gets removed from these lists, but gets put into a bin, so that if we decide, well, actually I don't want to delete this note, then we can just go back and say, yep, not in the bin anymore for about 30 days again. And if it's in the bin for 30 days because we haven't remembered it, or it wasn't that important that we say, yeah, no, I still want to remember it, then it automatically goes into the archive. And therefore is again this space between we want to store this actively and it's not important anymore. And as a final part, we have the archive. The archive is just simply everything that we have in our second brain stored as a list that is not relevant anymore. So every task completed, every project finished, every note that we don't need anymore. And therefore, it's just going to be a visual, not appealing, simple list. Just which area does it come from, what does it describe, or what is the description of it, and when was it added. And then you have the most recent at the top, and then can go further down if you need to find something that you deleted quite a while ago or just want to go through it again. But since if you know you need a project, we're going to add the subcategory project, tasks and notes, so that you can choose what you want to filter through. And also 2 things I've added into the archive is, first of all, the access to the database. The database in the archive has the simple reason that we usually don't need to access the database. It's usually all done through the visuals, through the individual pages, so we don't need to access it as long as we don't want to change anything specific. And therefore, it's not necessary to have them on every page displayed. So we'll link this just in the archive. And something else that we don't usually need is the guidelines. The guidelines are just how do we use this template, what can we all do, kind of like a description of everything that is in there and we want to use or we used to use for everyone who comes new to this and is like, well, how do I use this? Or everyone that has been away for a while and decides to revisit and wants to try it out again because their life has changed, so give it a second shot and want to have a quick overview on how we do it, how you could use it again, especially since just simply like to read through guidelines more than to watch a video about it. I think it is quite important to have this just simply in there, and it's still in the archive because you don't usually need it. The archive is, again, a place that you usually don't visit, just if you want to go back, look at the history, or look at the data, or look into the guideline. More reasons are not usually there for you to go into the archive, and your main navigation should be between the main areas. Also, something important that we have to look over when we create this is the appearance on the phone, but that is something that we will cover in the actual creation or later on in the actual creation. And that's it for this video. So thank you all for watching, and we will see us in the next video. just something I want to add in the end for me personally, or everyone who wants to watch this as a kind of memory or showcase of how I developed through this process. I have to say it's kind of making me nervous to talk about this now, but yeah, it is damn nervous. It makes me damn nervous to just simply go ahead, start talking into my phone and showcasing this, and it's really hard. That's why I always start rather late than early, because I'm procrastinating a lot. But I know that I always want to have it out on Sunday. Before midnight on Sunday, I want to have it out, this video. And therefore, I still do it. I mean, it's the 3rd week, so I can't say that much about it. And it just has been 3 weeks, but still, it's the 18th of January, so a bit of time has passed. And I'm really curious to see how it's going to end up in the end, actually. And I hope that I keep doing this. And for everyone who starts or plans to start, just keep doing it. I am hoping that it gets better, and I expect it to get better, but yeah, it's a process, so we will see.